Everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of The Chat. I'm Sue Stewart along with Pat LaRose, and we're going to get straight to our special guest because this man is one of the busiest people that we have the privilege in speaking with. Our Member of Parliament, Eric Duncan. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me back again. It's a privilege now, a two-time attendee here. This is great.
Well, there has been a lot has gone on, obviously, since you were last sitting with us in person. COVID-19 has uprooted us all in our regular natural habitat, and we want to know how you are doing. Pat, you actually asked that question. How's Eric doing?
Yeah.
Surviving. Well, it was actually interesting. I listened to the podcast after I was on it, and it originally came up on my my Apple podcast, and I listened to it again a couple of days ago just as a bit of a refresher. And exactly to the point, it's been a few months, and my macro time changes fast. But I'm doing well. We're keeping busy, and I consider myself lucky in my situation where I have the ability. I'm taking lots of phone calls and working with businesses and individuals, but to have the chance to try to make a difference right now, a lot of people have been stressed or have that anxiety, and I'm just lucky or consider myself fortunate that I've got a voice to try to help. If it's in Parliament talking about the tax deadline or spouses between Canada and the US that haven't seen each other, just to have the chance to get the word out and to speak for people and work on individual case files is good. So I'm looking forward to maybe a few days off here and there over the summer, but I'm doing well. I appreciate that.
And well deserved. But Pat, going on that note, where people are trying to see each other, you just brought it up because today the announcement came out about long-term care facilities, right, Pat?
Right. Yeah. We just saw it earlier today. I believe it was Doug Ford made the announcement that they're going to start allowing people to slowly go into long-term care facilities to visit.
Yeah, I saw something today, and I think that's a positive step. And I've said with this, the pandemic going on is that there is obviously a health with COVID, but there's a mental health aspect as well. And I have my own family situation. My Aunt Verla, she just celebrated her 75th anniversary, and she's been at the Dundas Manor in Winchester now, I'm going to say 4, maybe 5 years. And my Uncle Miles was recently admitted there. He had some issues with dementia and had become too much of a challenge for my Aunt Debbie. So he's been in there. And part of what I find in Uncle Miles's case with his dementia and his issues there, Aunt Debbie's going in very often, speaking with him, keeping him up. And having been away for 3 months, I worry about the mental health toll on people, particularly in long-term care that are used to families visiting and used to that extra interaction. So we had to be very careful with it. But I had to say, yes, there's an aspect there where families need to see each other there too safely. So we'll see where that goes.
And I think we could say the same when it comes to schools and kids. There are many different levels of children, and I fear some with moving into the autism category, how they need their structure and to see the people they need to, and Zooming might not be as easy. So I feel for everyone who's got different ways to have to cope and figure it out.
For sure. And say you mentioned it was children with special needs, whatever that contact and that routine is, I think is and I say it to the same thing. I think even myself to a totally different scale, but everybody has their own routines and getting their productivities and their mental health, their physical health. I've noticed I mentioned I've got a bit of a sunburn today because I'm trying to get it walking all the time now, just trying to keep active and trying to eat healthy, all these things that are ripple effects of the bigger pandemic. So I know students are anxious to get back to school. Parents are probably anxious for their kids to get back to school. And there's all these factors. But the big thing I said, and I've done this in my town halls or other things, I think people just need to be smart and be safe about this. And I think we've seen now where with the plexiglass, with masking, with washing our hands and using hand sanitizer more frequently, keeping a distance in most cases, it's just being really smart. And I think that's helping to flatten the curve and keep it down more importantly too. So the smarter we are about it, I think the better off and more normal we'll be through everything.
The other thing we had heard as well this past week is, speaking of schools, because now that everybody's emptying their lockers, parents are getting their kids to pick up their stuff to take it home for the official school year being done. Did I understand correctly, there's something to do with the post-secondary school? They may be starting back up July 1st?
See, different ones for post-secondary. So I love having specific examples. My 2 stepsisters who I'm living with right now with my family in South Mountain, they're University of Ottawa students. So there's certain summer courses that are being offered in some post-secondary, and there's been a mix of it. I know for my sisters going back in September, they're going to have a mix of online and in class, so social distancing, so certain number of students in the physical classroom depending on the size, and then most being able to attend online. So they normally move to Ottawa, rent a place, or stay at residence. They're going to be staying at home and participating online. So I think more getting back, same thing, I think people are going to want to play catch up with their some college and university courses. So I think there's a mix of small numbers in classes, but the majority are, if they're weren't all online before, they certainly are now.
Hey, we actually did say that to Dave McDonald last week when we spoke with him with the Upper Canada District School Board, that this normal is not natural for our age and but the kids doing it now, this is going to be their new normal. 10 years from now, be like, yeah, we've always worked from home. I hope that's not the way it goes, but they'll get used to it quick, I'm sure.
Yeah, and on that note, just talking about education, we had Dave McDonald on our last week's podcast, and we're talking a little bit about what we can expect with hopefully school returning in September. And he mentioned a few things that maybe we just want to get your thoughts on, and maybe you're having conversations with some of your peers in Parliament about it. But it's limiting the amount of kids in the classroom, maybe even swapping days. You were even talking about busing the kids into school. You said normally they would put 3 kids in each seat, but now you probably won't be able to do that. And then just the measures that they'll take place in school with disinfecting and wearing masks and limiting the contact on during recess. So what are your thoughts on that? Are you having discussions about that?
Yeah, so that's mostly dealt with at the provincial level, but I'll give an analogy. Part of the challenge that we have with this actually relates to my federal work, and I just got done a virtual parliamentary committee, and we're studying about the return of Parliament, how we get back to some part of normal in September, and we're looking at remote voting, whether it be electronic or proxy voting and different kind of technicalities. And part of the challenge we have right now is the same thing that trustees like Dave would have. What's the situation going to look like in September, right? Hopefully we'll be better off and it'll be getting better, but also having to prepare for a potential second wave, which is not uncommon in pandemics, but being ready to have that capacity to deal with it. So yeah, I think every job in schools are particularly that, maybe limiting the number of children on a bus and maybe having to wear masks, or all these different types of conversations inside the classroom, lunchrooms. I think of high schools where, you have 4 periods a day, so you're swapping classes all the time. They may look at redoing that and having some stability in terms of physical location where they're at. The lunch, as opposed to having lunch in the great big cafeteria, would you spread it out to the gym and multi-purpose rooms? So I think 2 things. One, it's going to depend on the lay of the land in September. And then also 2 is kind of having in the back of your mind, things are going well. Heaven forbid we get into a second wave, what that looks like. But from schools to every business that needs to reopen, you look at a bunch of different things. Everybody's got to have their own plan and be able to tweak it if need be, I think.
Right.
I can't even imagine how many plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, we're back to plan B again. Your head must be spinning at all times trying to figure what's next. I mean, now we're into stage 2, phase 2 is what we're calling it, with all the different other businesses that are finally getting to open up. Everybody, it's so funny how many people want a haircut. I really wish my hair grew fast, because I'm the only one that hasn't complained about not getting a haircut, I think.
I wish I had hair. So, I mean, we're at one step in the same case. But, well, I go back to the same thing. It's routine. It's going to the barber and seeing people. You're not going to be going back with 3 or 4 people in the chairs waiting. If it's a King's, the Little Ones, or the Trieste Barber Shop in Winchester, everything's going to be different. But I think people are just anxious to get that routine again. And I think it's a mental health aspect, getting a beard trim and a hair trim and just getting back into that some semblance of normalcy. So, I laugh, and I mean, it's been a busy few months for me. And somebody says, what a time to be a new member of Parliament. I said, well, it wouldn't matter if I was here 6 months or 16 years, member of Parliament, business owner, whatever it may be, Pat, in the media environment, everybody is experiencing a new normal of making adjustments on the fly. So it's not just, I guess mine has a bit more of a public role, but every job everywhere. Nobody has been status quo or bored the last couple of months.
Well, with everything that has been going on the last few months, there's a lot of people that have, looking to their faith and not being able to go to their churches. And feel like they're part of an amazing congregation to lift them up. And again, with, I don't want to say mental illness, but it does help with our mental stability, trying to keep connections with people. Churches will be opening up as well, as far as I understand. How is that going to work?
So they're going to be at 30% capacity from the announcement that the Ontario government made this week. And again, I think what I say to people on two things. Dr. Paul Remiliotis, our Chief Medical Officer of Health, had this really good analogy that I thought was important, kind of putting in context why or how the method to the madness of what they're doing. And like Dr. Paul said, we're not going to just flick a switch on and be back to normal. It's going to be a dimmer switch. And I thought that was really good for people that way too, of where, we had essential businesses open during everything, and then the phase one, now we're in phase two. It's not so much who's the most important getting open and first, it's what's the safest to do. And we had some calls this week, and part of the challenge with churches being at 30%, you still can't have a wedding or a funeral with more than 10 people, but on Sunday you can go to church, and you could potentially, depending on the size of the church, you could have more than that. So there's still these gaps in how, in quote unquote, what makes sense. But I know what they're trying to do is just open things up chunk by chunk, phase by phase, and not try to overwhelm, or if there is an increase in cases. So to your point, faith is important for people. And I think it's a physical sense of congregation, but then just getting back into routine. And I think there's going to be a challenge, and not to stereotype the demographics perhaps of some of our churches. They often tend to skew to an older population that may be more vulnerable, that may have pre-existing conditions. So they're going to have to play it safe as well. There may be some elderly people, for an example, very strong in their faith and they miss going to church, but do they want to risk doing that? But I think a lot of churches now are doing online services. They're going to obviously be going back to the physical in-person stuff, but trying to bridge the gap of everything is just mentioned, but everybody's struggling and trying to balance it out. Our churches and faith communities are certainly doing through the same thing right now. So it's the balance. I'm anxious to see how it goes, but 30% can be a wide variety of numbers depending on the size of your building.
I'm wondering if there's been any sort of way of doing a baptism online, because I don't know how that one would work.
There's a first for everything, I tell you. That's why I laughed. I said I saw massage therapy coming back on. I'm like, well, if you can't get an appointment, just get a Zoom call for a massage. I don't know how that's going to work.
It's interesting you talk about religion, you talk about the demographic. It would be really interesting to see if, with them going virtually and doing them online, the services online, if that's attracting a younger demographic.
Yeah, absolutely, and in a different way too. And there's, when we look at faith and in churches and things, it's a bit of an interest to me. My denomination is United Church. My mom and my grandmother on my mom's side of the family, we have our small little church in the town of Halbert. You blink, you miss it, between South Mountain and Brinston. And but I'm always interested in some of the connections between congregation size demographics. The one thing which is just a bit off topic, music. Live music, I find, where if you have, I notice churches that have bands and the livelier, aspect tend to draw younger people. And I'm wondering how those churches, maybe, are they opening up to a new audience by being more online and more virtual? I'm interested to see how they get through this current challenge, but then post-COVID, because people are watching online, are they going to attract a different new generation, younger generation to church? So
definitely an interesting way of looking at it, that's for sure. Can I ask what your sign is? What's your birthday? What do you go, Zodiac?
Scorpio. November 10th is my birthday.
Okay, well, mine's in October. I'm a Libra. I'm also United. I find you and I have a lot of things in common, except for thick skin. I don't know how you go day to day with the criticism that can come up. And I do have to ask, and if you don't mind, I'm going to just go straight into it because I know you're always open to questions. You recently went behind Erin O'Toole. You've endorsed him, and it seems to have gotten a few people up in arms. Can we ask you why?
Sure. So, our leadership race, we're going to be deciding the new leader of the opposition, and hopefully, if in my biased case, hopefully the next prime minister, whenever the election comes, whenever that may be. So we have, and I'll say that we have two main candidates that I think would be considered the front runners right now. Peter MacKay, who's well known from being a co-founder of the current Conservative Party, and then Erin O'Toole, who I backed. Erin's been a member of Parliament for the Durham region and the GTA since about 2012. And Erin's currently an MP. So I've got to work alongside him in the House of Commons for a few months, before he started his leadership race and was traveling across the country. And then when COVID hit, like everybody else, they're learning new ways of campaigning. But I've got to know Erin very well over the last little while, and thick skin, it's part of the game. I look at things glass half full. For every criticism I get, I'm very lucky in our riding, in our area, that I have a lot of supporters as well. And I say to everyone, I'm backing Erin. I think he's the right choice. I think he's what I would call a compassionate conservative in terms of social policy, in terms of being fiscally responsible. He lines up with what I have, and it just goes to today's media environment. I think a social media environment, media environment. That's a general broad statement that I find just the reactions are always a bit heavier no matter what now. I find you just hear it more than ever before, and it's something you have to get used to. There's people that maybe aren't, that were criticizing me, that aren't members of the Conservative Party. It wouldn't matter if the Pope ran or Oprah Winfrey ran. They wouldn't support my choice for leader if I endorsed them, or if they're in the party, they're perhaps supporting another candidate. So you have to make a decision, and do that. I'm very happy with Erin. I've got to see him firsthand, and I realize in my job I get to see somebody a lot more of these candidates, being in Ottawa and being in the Hill. That's just a natural part of it. You just get used to it, and you roll with it. I think Erin would be a great leader. And again, I would be happy with Peter MacKay as well. I think Peter would be good. There's no hard feelings that way. But just the times we live in, I think everyone's got an opinion, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Everyone has an opinion. You're absolutely right. Good or bad. I'd like to call it constructive criticism, but some people just go straight to the criticism.
And I laugh. I use my mother as an example. I said this back in municipal politics. In municipal politics, less partisan, not party politics, when I was mayor, and there was a wide array of issues you were dealing with. There weren't necessarily conservative or liberal or left wing or right wing. It's a lot of budget stuff. And I said to somebody, if you only voted for me, if you agree with every single position I had, even my own mother wouldn't vote for me. You look on a whole of somebody, right? You look on all the issues, you look at the person of who they are, their experience, and the balance of all that. And that's how you have to make it. We've got 4 or 5 main political parties in Canada. We usually in election locally have 4 or 5 candidates to choose from. Nobody's going to align with one candidate on everything. It's who you think would make the best representative, and who you agree with the most in terms of how you do that. And that's always been politics that way.
You don't have to always agree on what somebody believes in every single point, as you said, but it doesn't mean you don't have to you have to dislike them.
Exactly. I'm getting used to that now, because I'm used to that in municipal politics. If a councillor disagreed, yeah, that's okay. We have a vote, we move on, and I'd go have a beer with you, out in the weekend if I saw you. And I notice on the Hill, there's some members that are like that of all parties, and there are some that just can't get past the blinders of.
Who's that?
Well, many, yeah, many. I'd be a while naming some of them, the good and the bad. But yeah, it's just a way you look at it. You can agree to disagree. You can still be friends, and you're still a good person. It's just a simple. I don't know if it's my upbringing or what it is, but that's always been something for me.
I love that you said that because, growing up, I was always told, you had to vote a certain way for a certain party. And the older I got, the more I understood, the more I based my decision exactly the way you just said. Whoever speaks most of my values and is willing to do the things that I agree with the most. But to me, I think it's a very important attribute to be able to get up and convict with integrity and passion and enthusiasm, that same message. And that's what gets to me. If somebody can get up and do that, then they catch me right away, and that's what makes me pay attention to them.
Everybody's got a different way of voting. Some vote on the local representatives, some vote on the party, and to that point is age and experience and life experience, things that may happen to you. Your voter perspective changes over time too. The number of friends, that's kind of interesting. I always find, and I advocate with this when I go to high schools or post-secondary, and in the partisan politics of it, I'm amazed the number of friends in university that are more, I'd say, left-leaning, if it's the NDP or the Liberals, whatever it may be. And I find as they get a mortgage, they pay tax, whatever it may be, sometimes that life experience changes their perspective. They open a small business, or they unfortunately have a tragic experience with the healthcare system or a loved one in long-term care. It changes your look and outlook on what's your priority and how you think of something. So people always evolve. If it's more on the personal side, if it's more on the ideology side, that's the nature. That's what democracy is all about.
So if you don't mind, we're going to switch gears just a little bit and go to some of the, COVID has been the huge topic, but also now with the campaigns with Black Lives Matter, we had our own petition protest, what do you call it? Not happy, peaceful protest. Sorry, the word wasn't coming to me. We had our own peaceful protest here in Cornwall. Can we get your thoughts on that? Because now they're taking it to the next level of not just the protest, but you see around the United States, and I think some places here in Canada, where we're removing statues that at one time, were symbolic to our history and what we were learning, but now coming to see that, some of these were slave drivers and such. What are your thoughts on that?
So I made a Facebook post about it, about the march in Cornwall and in the local aspect, and then some of the global things that have been happening. And I'm always really cautious to say, and I struggle with what to say. I agree that racism does exist, that we need to certainly improve and just understand better what some of these challenges are. And I believe there are some systematic issues. And then there's just a perception of standing up whenever something is wrong and calling it out. In terms of doing that. The local thing today, just off the, as news changes, Dundas Street in Toronto, I saw in the news yesterday that it was named after somebody from the 17 or 1800s in the UK. Never heard of him before. And apparently there was research was done. Somebody came out and said he opposed or delayed the abolition of slavery by several years back in the 1800s or whatever. So now they wanted to rename Dundas Street. So I thought in the back of my head, I wonder what the county of Dundas was named after. Sure enough, I Googled it last night and it's after the same gentleman. I'd never known that. I was mayor and warden. I had never known that until last night. And somebody says, well, if you keep that now, it's racist. I wonder on that of where, until last night, I didn't even know who the gentleman was. I still know nothing about him except for that little excerpt. And I'm just a person that the word that I use sometimes is word salad. I hate the platitudes and the different things that are done on certain issues. And this is not just on the issue of combating racism. This isn't everything else. I'm more of a person on those specific actions of where I'm interested in working with our police. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic that Danny Aikman, our chief of police in the city of Cornwall Police Service, and the deputy Shauna was there as well. And they were there with the protesters. They were listening and engaging. To me, I'm like, I just like the more hands-on, tangible differences we can make. So I still struggle, and I'm in a listening. I said I'm in a listening and learning phase right now of reaching out to persons of color, visible minorities in our area, and just getting those examples and hearing those things of what more we can do. So I still say I'm openly struggling with how to respond. Not that I don't want to respond. It's just making sure that whatever we do is meaningful. And my other reflection on this has been the media cycle of, I thought I had ADD until I started following the media, and sometimes you can get off to a national issue. And then we were talking about COVID, and it was all a matter of, the lockdown and safety first. And then we were having, rightfully these conversations about racism. And I just worry, I don't want this conversation to go away and get put in the back burner. If we're going to get action and improve this, I don't want there to be another George Floyd, because after a week we were talking about something else and it went to the back burner. So to me, part of this other challenge is how do we keep the conversation going and actually make meaningful, tangible change?
Well, and teach kids the words empathy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's when you're going back to social media and the comments, and one of the things I did want to get your thoughts on is I'm seeing comments and even articles being published online about the people's opinions of the protest. I shouldn't say the protest, but more so of the restrictions that were put on with the pandemic and the limited amount of people that were allowed to be around, and then relating that to the amount of people at the protest. And then the same with the D-Day memorial that the Legion had, the event that they had where there were a limited amount of people. So there's a lot of discussion of people, not that they're saying it's not fair, but they're questioning why one's okay and the other's not.
Agreed. And it gets into this gray area of where, when I think in the case I look at public health and some of the advice that was given, the reality was a very clear number of hundreds of people were going to show up. So as opposed to saying, no, don't go necessarily, there was the encouragement to participate virtually, but I don't want to make an inappropriate example, but it's like the parent telling the kid, okay, if you're going to go out on Friday night and you're going to be out late, at least be smart, do A, B, and C, right? So it's the same thing where I think public health went and said, look, we can't stop you from going. If you're going to go, wear a mask, do this, and be smart about it. And there's a commentary about getting tested. So I don't mean to disrespect with the comparison, just trying to come up with something that way. And on the Legion, I agree. I felt bad for the Legion being restricted in their number of people on something as important as D-Day. Many did do an acknowledgement online. I shared the iconic photo of the SD&G Highlanders storming Juno Beach on D-Day. That's a real local example. And there's that balance. So I just think I go back to what I said at the beginning of our podcast, that if people are smart about it and wise about it, I think there is, there's going to be more flexibility and more ability to kind of respond if there's something like a service like that where people can be socially distanced and smart. I hope that's the way to go. But there's certainly, we just talked about churches and church services versus wedding and funerals, and the D-Day ceremony versus the Black Lives Matter. I just, I appeal to people just to say, let's just be smart about this and be calm about it. There are some gray areas and not everybody's going to be happy, but let's just try to keep in the same lane and the same page here and be safe at the end of the day.
Eric, I think our time is about to run out on our Zoom meeting. I think we clocked at 40 minutes. So before you get shut down and we don't get to say our thank yous, we really appreciate everything that you're doing for SD&G as a whole. We are appreciative of your knowledge and your ability to get out there and not fight for our community, but certainly make sure that you're doing the best you can for us all.
Yes,
well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much, and the chance to come back again. This is great. And I was saying to somebody, I did a post a few months ago now, before my first time on the program, that I'm doing a Facebook Live or whatever it was, and somebody said, you should go on a podcast, or you should do your own podcast. And then Patrick emailed the next week to say, would you like to go on? So I appreciate it's a new platform and a new way to reach out to people and just have that extended conversation, as opposed to having a 15-second clip or a couple of lines in a social media post to flesh local issues out and, to have that conversation. I think it humanizes us all. So I appreciate the invite to come back again. Maybe third time would be the charm. No pressure.
That's right.
Next time we'll let you know flower prints are in.
Exactly. I got my pink shirt, but not the flower prints. I'll smarten up.
All right. Thank you so much, our Member of Parliament, Eric Duncan. We appreciate your time. Stay healthy, stay safe, and all the best to you and all of your constituents as well. And we want to thank our friends, Pat, for their great sponsorship.
Yes, yeah. Thanks to Riverside Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. They are able to assist you right now. You can go in the lot and browse the inventory, but you can also browse it online at riversidechrysler.ca, and we encourage you to stay connected with them on social media. That's Riverside Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram.
All right, for now, this is Sue Stewart, Pat LaRose, Eric Duncan. Have a great week. Talk to you next time on The Chat.